This is the 7th of the series in our series entitled Principles and Practices of Building Community. And though the other 6 DVDs were just, we were so thrilled to be able to put them out, and they were so widely accepted, this is the one I am truly most excited about. Throughout the country, and you may not know this, tremendous changes are occurring in how we deliver services to people with developmental disabilities in day services. It is a tidal wave of change that is occurring throughout this country, and I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity to share with you what is happening in terms of these changes and what we all need to do to help improve the quality of life of the men and women who we support in day service programs. When I hear someone strongly in support of classic day programs, I feel a desire for them to live the experience. Now, if that comes across as somewhat of an insult, I don't know what to say. But so often I will ask folks, hey, what do you think about your day program service? Are you proud of it? And people say, oh, well, we do a wonderful job. We have a great day program. Then my response to people who feel their day program is so wonderful, then they should have to live the experience. I make a very similar comment when I go to group homes and I ask staff, hey, do you think the people you support have a good life? And usually the staff will say, well, Tom, I think they have a wonderful life. Then my response is, I wish their life on you and your family. And then all of a sudden, for many folks, they feel that is somehow an insult. But what is our expectation? Our expectation is that day service should be a service that we would all want to embrace. It should be a service that you and I would enjoy being in and experiencing, if you will. The change that is before us in transitioning the classic, and I want to emphasize the word classic over and over again, the classic day service to a state-of-the-art day service is extremely challenging. No doubt about it. The metaphor that I use, the feelings that are commonly evoked in changing day services are not unlike the feelings a couple might experience when finding out that they're going to have their first child. It's exciting. Holy mackerel, we're finally going to have our first child. Is that really, really exciting? It's joyous. Oh, we're thrilled. Let's tell the whole family how wonderful it is. Oh no, what are we going to do? I've never raised a child before. How are we going to make this happen? If any of you have had a child, you know that sort of sense of fear. How are we going, what are we going to do? I don't know how to raise a child. That sense of anxiety. You know, I'm having a difficult time making it from paycheck to paycheck now. How are we going to have enough money to afford the child and all the expenses associated with that child? And guess what? There's no turning back now. Once that decision is made that we're going to have that child and the child is here, there's no turning back now. What do I do? Transitioning day program services is very similar to that. Once an agency makes that decision about how they're going to alter the chemistry, the culture of the organization, how they're going to provide the men and women who they support an opportunity to be productive adults, once you're on that path, there's really no turning back. There is a journal, and it's called The Riot. There are actually 3 newsletters written by people primarily with disabilities in this country, and I believe one is called The Mouth, one is called The Disability Rag, and the other is called The Riot. And this is from The Riot. And I wanted to share it with you. I thought this, again, is written by people with disabilities. And it's not the easiest thing to hear, but let's go through it. Look, first off, we want to thank everyone who over the years helped to build the service system. Thank you, but here's the thing. Hey, come closer. Listen, a lot of what you built, we don't want. You know, institutions, sheltered workshops, group homes, we don't want any of that stuff. We want to live like other people. Real jobs, real apartments, and homes of our own. Boyfriends and girlfriends, a real community life, and here's another thing. We want to be heard. We want to make decisions about our lives. And that is what this discussion today is all about giving people an opportunity to have a real life. And a real life includes being productive, making a contribution to your community. You know, what is right is not always popular, and what is popular is not always right. Obviously, I stand before you and have a great deal of passion and a very strong belief in providing men and women with developmental disabilities an opportunity to work, to be productive adults. I believe in that fervently. I believe it is the right thing. I also recognize that the right thing is not always the most popular thing. I recognize that. And that is one of our challenges. Typical day programs appear, and again, please, I want to emphasize the word typical, appear to reflect an overall pattern of clinical judgment inconsistent with what is required to realize a quality of life. Again, the word typical needs to be emphasized. Having people in typical day programs, and I'm going to define that for you in a lot of detail, in my opinion, does not lead to a quality life. What leads to a quality life is providing people an opportunity to be productively involved in making a contribution. That leads to a quality life. Traditional day services emphasize skill acquisition, focusing on people's weaknesses, their inabilities. I think most of you know that. You know, typical day programs, we see people as if they're broken, needing to be fixed. We have an objective. We call it habilitation. We used to call it active treatment. We have an objective for somebody to improve their palmar grasp or eye-hand coordination or attention to task. We have them come in and more often than not, in classic day programs, give them activities that have little meaning or value in order to improve that particular skill. We focus on people's weaknesses. Typical day programs focus on what people cannot do. Work focuses on abilities, building on strengths which lead to the acquisition of new skills. In other words, habilitation is not a goal, it is a result. By giving people an opportunity to engage in meaningful tasks, they will gain new skills, they will grow, develop, and become more independent. I truly believe that. Focus on people's strengths, not their limitations. Day program routines. As I said, I will list for you, what does this classic day program look like? And all of you can ask yourself are we a classic day program or do we go beyond that? A home promotes natural routines. Truly it does. Do you know, group home providers, people that provide supported living in residences, will never hire a staff who hasn't lived in a residence. I'm going to say that again because that may throw you for a loop. When we employ staff as direct support professionals to work in a residence, we will never hire a staff who hasn't lived in a residence, right? So if I hire a staff, everyone has lived someplace. You live in a home, a mobile home, a condominium, you know, a tent, an underground dwelling cave, but you've always lived someplace. And so we hire a new staff. We haven't provided them any training, and I walk into the kitchen with them, and I ask the new staff, do you know what we do here? I can guarantee you the staff will know. I walk into a laundry room with a new staff. Don't give them any training, and I'll say, do you know what we do here? And they'll know what you do in a laundry room. We walk into the dining room. I said, do you know what you do in the dining room? And they will know, so on and so forth. But it's very different when we hire staff to work in a day program, because most day programs are what? Contrived. People make something up. Whenever you're in a day program, somebody had to make a decision. What are these people going to do when they're here? That's logical enough. In a home, no one's making anything up. You have to cook a meal. You know, you have to wash the dishes afterwards. You have to clean your house. The grass grows. You got to mow your yard. But not in a day program. People seem to always be making something up. Let's take a look at what they're contriving and what they're making up. Sometimes these day programs are academic programs. The staffs decide what this person really needs is, we're going to teach him how to write his name. Remember, we focus on what people can't do. Or he's going to learn his colors. That's sort of an academic thing, or we need to teach him how to count. So that's why we're going to have him in the program. Some programs are ADL programs, activities of daily living. What we need to teach these folks is how to wash their hands, how to brush their teeth, how to comb their hair. They're ADL programs. Some programs are sensory motor programs. They have exercise, if you will. That's very common. And or pegs and a pegboard, right? Sensory motor, eye-hand coordination, motor activities. Some programs are community integration programs. We're going to take them to the community, and we're going to go to the mall, we're going to go to the museum, so on and so forth. In some programs, they say, are leisure programs. We're going to have folks sit around looking at magazines, et cetera, et cetera. Typical day programs are comprised of teaching academics, activities of daily living, sensory motor skills, community integration, and leisure activities, which, by the way, I'm not saying these things are not important. Those things are very important to a quality life. The question is, when and where and how should people learn them? That's the important point. When and where and how should people have an opportunity to learn them and or be engaged with these activities? A mom came up to me some time ago, and I was talking about the typical day programs, and I even hesitate in sharing this with you because it's pretty blunt. But in essence, she says, if you're not retarded when you go in, you will be when you come out. When you look at many of the classic day programs, and I see people dropping checkers into vertical slots, or many of the other things that they do that have little meaning or value, and you do that day after day after day after day, I understand where she is coming from. How can a program be good when we talk about a good day program? When, and let's look at some of these specific points, because I really want you all to go away with the sense of, I never thought of this before. I didn't realize that there may be are alternative ways in which we can support people to improve the quality of their life. So I want to challenge you, and the challenge may be a little painful, but here it goes. How can a program be good when placing pegs in a board and beads on strings and nuts and bolts in the name of a developmental model? And for any of you who say is, I didn't know there were agencies that still had people do things like that, trust me, there are. How can a program be good when people are spending their day learning numbers, colors, coin, and alphabet identification, which is little to no value to them? It's really not going to make a difference in terms of the quality of their life. And by the way, if we're spending days, months, weeks, years in teaching somebody how to write their name, and the man is now 35, why don't we get him a signature stamp? Let's move on. How can a program be good when mall herding, van therapy, and other activities which should occur in the evenings, weekends, and days off? Now, that's an important point. I think, visiting the mall is a wonderful thing to do. I think going bowling is great. I think going to museums is a great idea. But when do most people do that? They do that when they're not working. They do it in the evenings, they do it on weekends, and they do it on their days off. How can a program be good when people are sitting around engaged in ADL kind of activities? I commonly do coaching on site, and I was with a group of folks who were accompanying some individuals to a fast food restaurant, and they were sitting eating their meal, and I was there with them coaching. And at the end of the meal, one of the women who they were supporting reaches into her purse, takes out a comb, and starts combing her hair at the table in the restaurant. It became very obvious to me why she did that. They were teaching grooming skills as part of a group activity. Back in the day program, they had people sitting around teaching ADL skills, and she really did not understand that this is a personal kind of act that needs to be restricted to a bathroom or a bedroom. How can a day program be good when there are contrived sensory stimulation activities? There are still places that have those sensory stimulation rooms. Have you ever heard of these sensory stimulation rooms? They have a mirror on the ceiling going around. Causes nausea in half the people in the room. They have a bunch of Christmas tree lights blinking off and on, causing half the place to go into seizures. They call it sensory stimulation room. I'd like to know why they would call it a sensory stimulation room when you walk in there, half the people are sleeping. And What do we really believe the value is of that? It has a history. Let me just take a moment to tell you the history, since so many day programs do things that are called sensory stimulation. You know, the field of occupational therapy is relatively new to our industry, to the field of developmental disabilities. Occupational therapists have been around for a very, very long period of time, but they really began to have a presence in the 1950s in developmental centers. And the occupational therapist at that time recognized that there were many people with rubella, as an example, who couldn't see, couldn't hear. They had very significant intellectual challenges, who were engaged in intense body rocking and biting their hands and so forth. And they realized that their brains were atrophied. They were living in environments where all the surfaces were hard, terrazzo floors, cinder block walls. And the occupational therapist realized that they needed sensory input. So they developed sensory stimulation kits where they got feathers and sandpaper and SOS pads and various smells and herbs which the individuals could interact with and feel. It was a wonderful idea, and it did help many of these folks. Those kind of activities really make no sense today unless we make a decision that we're going to deny people an opportunity to feel the suds on their hands when they wash the dishes. If you're not going to give people an opportunity to feel the suds on their hands by washing the dishes, if people don't have an opportunity to feel the vibrations of the vacuum cleaner on their hands when vacuuming the floor, they don't have an opportunity to feel the feathers on the feather duster, then my response is you better do a sensory stimulation program. When you deny people meaningful life activities, then a sensory stimulation program may make sense. In my opinion, sensory stimulation is not a program. It is life. The men and women who we support need more sensory stimulation, not less. And when I walk into the typical day program and there's some staff there putting hand lotion on somebody, and I say, well, what are you doing? And they're saying is, it's our sensory, they're not saying is we're helping him because his hands are dry. They say it's our sensory stimulation program. It's a good indication to me that the reason the staff is doing that is they really don't have an understanding of what they need to do to help that individual improve the quality of their life. How can a program be good when coloring, speak and say, Lincoln Logs, puzzles, which are normally toys for children, become the primary media that are used in the room? How can a program be good when simulated pre-vocational tasks are taken apart in front of people? And I remember the day, I've got to say, you know, I remember when I was thrilled that I would go into day programs and teach staff how to use simulated activities where we would sort of put nuts and bolts together in a pretend kind of way, and then we'd take all those things apart again, because that was an improvement over people doing little to nothing in their life. And ultimately, how can a program be good when people spend a good part of their day waiting? I go into the program and I say, well, what are you doing? Oh, we're waiting for our next break. What are you doing? We're waiting to eat lunch. What are you doing? Oh, we're waiting to have someone take us to the bathroom. What are you doing? We're waiting to start the next activity, or we're waiting to leave for the day. You know, many folks who we support spent their lives in places, very large places, some of them large residential facilities, if you will, places that were called institutions, and they spent their entire time waiting. And they have been emancipated from those kind of environments, and they are now in community-based day service programs. And when I hear that somebody is waiting for the next activity, or they're waiting, the conclusion that I come to is what they're really waiting for is to have a life. That's my conclusion. What does that mean to you and I? That means we need to develop opportunities for the folks who we support that keep them actively involved during all aspects of the day to the fullest extent possible. And I'm going to share with you the strategies to make that happen. There's a way in which we can make that happen, keeping people actively involved. And I believe the word wait is the most vulgar of all words, because the word wait implies that the person's time is of little meaning or value, and it's under somebody else's control. You know, there used to be what we called a continuum. And that word is no longer popular. We really don't recognize it. And it was commonly represented as a pyramid. And the continuum, if you will, reflected opportunities for being involved in your day from the least restrictive to the most restrictive. And the most normalized, least restricted thing that people could do is to be in integrated employment. You are all in integrated employment. I'm in integrated employment. It's the least restrictive thing to do. And then that model said that the next thing is a work enclave. And by the way, we can debate and we can argue the order in which these things occur, but generally this is what this continuum would look like. The next less restrictive thing is a work enclave, where you have a group of people with disabilities in a large industrial setting. Could be a factory, could be an office, and 3, 4, 5 people working together, and they may have a job coach that assists them in that enclave. The next is a sheltered employment program. The next is a work activity center. Next is a pre-vocational program. And finally, the next is some kind of day treatment program. And there may be many other things that people would indicate could be between these various levels. Someone say, well, a mobile work crew really goes after a work enclave. And there's no reason to debate it. I'm just showing this to you in order to make a point. And here's the point that needs to be made. Every one of these options have criteria that people must meet in order to move into the next option. If you will, if you're going from day treatment into a pre-vocational program, many pre-vocational programs will say, in order for you to be eligible to receive services in this pre-vocational program, we will not accept people who require a one-on-one. If you are so aggressive in your behaviors or issues of conduct or so out of control, we can't serve you here. The Work Activity Center may say, in order for you to come from the pre-vocational program into our Work Activity Center, you have to be continent. We will not serve people who require assistance in changing their depends. You have to be continent. The sheltered employment program may say, in order for you to come from a work activity program into sheltered employment, you have to have a certain level of productivity in order to be eligible. And I think you all recognize this. There are criteria that people had to meet in order to move through each of these levels, if you will. What do we know? Are you ready for this one? We now realize that day treatment programs are not needed. Pre-vocational programs, work activity, sheltered employment programs, work enclaves are not needed. Everyone today can be employed in a fully integrated setting if, and I'm going to talk about the ifs, if everyone can be employed, no matter how challenged the person is, no matter what their level of intellectual ability may be, regardless of their physical challenges, everyone can be employed. I'm going to share with you a sort of a corollary that we all can relate to that will help us understand this. We all know Ronald Reagan. You've all heard of Ronald Reagan, obviously, a previous president. Ronald Reagan passed away of Alzheimer's. And in the latter stages of Alzheimer's, people lose their ability to be continent. They usually can't recognize anybody around them in the latter stages. Latter stages, they can't walk. They're not even able to chew because their brain can't communicate to their mouth how to chew or swallow. In the latter stages, let us assume that Ronald Reagan was unable to walk. He didn't recognize his family. He couldn't chew. He couldn't swallow. Do you think his family was sitting around thinking about putting, Ronald Reagan in a nursing home? You think that's what they were? Of course not. Because no one needs a nursing home, and I use that as an example. The only reason people go into nursing homes is for financial reasons. They're not for clinical reasons, because there isn't any service that is provided in a nursing home that you couldn't purchase or obtain in your own home, even if it's a physician 24 hours a day or a nurse 24 hours a day. The same thing applies in this discussion. Everyone can work and be employed if we can provide the resources that are needed for them to engage in that employment activity. And we're going to talk about what that means. Time is the enemy. Time is the enemy because people have too much of it and not a meaningful way to fill it. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. Free time. The people who we support have no right to free time. That's an interesting and very provocative statement. To engage in inappropriate behavior. The amount of free time that someone should have available is determined by their ability to management ultimately. And are people waiting for lunch, for their medication, for the next activity, to go home, etc., to have a life, as we said. How is that free time sometimes spent? I hear staff say, okay, let's go ahead and we're going to do a van ride. I call it van therapy, if you will, right? Van therapy. I was in the city, and I'll leave it unnamed, and I got into the vehicle. There were 6 folks leaving their day program, and I was with the 6 folks, and the staff says, let's go on a van ride. We're driving around the city. I'm with these 6 guys in the back of the van for like 20 minutes, and one of the men in the back of the van yells up to one of the staff, excuse me, that's driving, and says, am I cured yet? The staff turns around and yells, no, 5 more miles. Now, that's ridiculous in terms of van therapy. Or mall herding, another not uncommon activity in the traditional day program, if you will. Work. Work is the great equalizer. We're now ready to focus on the concept. Here's the option, work. You know, when my grandparents came to this country, they couldn't speak a word of English. I had one grandparent from Romania, one from Russia, one from Lithuania, and one from Poland. They couldn't speak a word of English, and they didn't have 10 cents in their pocket. They found their place in this society, in this country, through work. Women in this country who have for far too long been treated as second-class citizens. Women are beginning to find their place in this society through work. Racial minorities who have been horribly discriminated against are beginning to find their place in this society through work. If you believe that is true, would it not be true for people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities, who probably are among the most disenfranchised people there are? Work. Definition is the expenditure of meaningful effort. This is a very important definition in this conversation. Again, we are defining work as the expenditure of meaningful effort, which means is if the person you had doing it wasn't doing it, you'd have to hire somebody to do it. Again, if the person you had doing it wasn't doing it, you'd have to hire somebody to do it. And my question to you is, when is the last time you picked up the classified section of the newspaper and found an ad for 2 professional I'm not saying that someone may not enjoy pounding pegs in a board or putting beads on a string. I mean, that's fine if somebody likes that, but it has no meaning. And the major transition in day service is moving from activities that have little meaning and value, such as going to a shopping mall. By the way, is going to a shopping mall an essential aspect of life? Yeah, people need to go buy things. I understand that. Is going to a movie theater fun and enjoyable? Yeah. But under our definition, you wouldn't hire somebody to go to a movie theater, right? And our definition of work is if you wouldn't hire somebody to do it, then by definition, it's not work. With every breath we take, and this is a good place where all of us can start, with every breath that we take, to cement the foundation for day program transition, the mantra must be work. What's that mean? You're working hard. As often as we can, we want to be able to use the word work with the people who we support. Boy, you're working really hard. Are you ready to go to work now? Are you ready to go to work now? Did you have a good day at work? Unlike in the old system, what did people say? Gee, are you going to school? Are you coming to your class? Gee, are you going to your programs now? You understand that difference between talking about going to school, going to class, versus going to work? The emphasis is on work. You're working really hard. You're a good worker. Let's look at a value basis for employment. And this is a good opportunity for me to differentiate work from employment. Work, as we said, is the expenditure of meaningful effort. Employment is work that is remunerated, which means the person gets money for their work. Not all work is employment. Sometimes people work and they don't get paid, and you all know what that is. That's volunteering, which is a wonderful thing to do, and we're going to talk about that kind of work as well. Let's look at a value basis for employment and why many of us feel so strongly about people being employed. Work is the great equalizer. It promotes equality. Work enhances self-worth. It allows people to say, I am somebody. I am a good and valued human being. You know, it's really interesting. I'll meet folks and I'll say, do you have a job? Do you work? People who we support. And the guy, I may have a hard time understanding him, but he says, yeah, you know, I work. And I said, do you like your job? And his face lights up. His face lights up. I like my job. I like my work. It alters how people feel about themselves. We've all had the opportunity to meet folks who were unemployed for, you know, a significant amount of time. People without disabilities. What does it do to one's sense of self, right? Work leads to self-determination. It is empowering. People feel like they can make a difference in the world around them. And it allows people to earn money. And money increases one's ability to self-determine. It can change one's life. Work emphasizes ability versus disability. And we had referenced that earlier. You know, when people come to a program, they come because of what it is they cannot do. When people go to work, we build on people's strengths. And as a result of them being engaged in the work activity, they gain new skill and ability. They grow, develop, and become more independent. Work is liberating. It frees the individual from a life of dependence. Competence is not a prerequisite for employment. Perhaps that's one of the most powerful statements that I can make. Competence is not a prerequisite for employment. How smart you are, your physical prowess should never be the determination whether you have an opportunity to be employed or not. And there should be few excuses why people don't work. You know, I'm sensitive to that. There are some reasons why people don't have to work, but there should be few excuses. And let's take a look at some legitimate reasons that I think that are legitimate. You may not agree with me, why people should not have to work. Number one is age. I believe that older or elderly people should have an opportunity or an option for retirement. I truly believe that. Many folks, when they get older, or what we commonly see as retirement age, elect not to retire. I do not support the idea of taking an individual who's 50 years old in a day program because we cannot figure out what he really wants to do. We cannot figure out how to get him involved in being productive and then put him in a retirement program. To me, that's not acceptable. You know, children should not have to work. But I recognize there are some countries in this world where children have to work in order to sustain their families. I consider that unfortunate. I consider it tragic, and children should not have to work. Wealthy people should not have to work. When Bill Gates denounced his retirement from employment, and by the way, he didn't announce his retirement from work because he's heading up the Gates Foundation, which is volunteer work. But when he announced his retirement, I didn't hear people say, that lazy bum, why doesn't he get back to work? Because people who are wealthy, if they don't want to work, don't work. And people who have significant medical health issues of an acute type should not have to work. You go to a hospital, they take out your appendix, and you need a week to recover. You don't work. That's fine. Christopher Reeves, who you all may remember, was sustained on a ventilator for many years as a result of a fall off a horse. Within 3 weeks of his death, even though he was ventilator dependent, he continued to work. So even folks who are that medically involved should be able to work, to be productive in their life. And here's the fourth reason why people should not have to work. Everybody has a right to be a beach bum. You don't want to work, that's fine. Here's my response, and this may be a tough one to hear, friends. I don't want to support them. If people wish not to work, my response to that is that's absolutely fine. Hand in your Medicaid card. Don't ask me to pay my hard-earned taxes so people can go into a program and do little of meaning, anything of meaning or value in their life. By the way, I'm not cheap. I'm more than happy to pay more taxes if my taxes are going to support that person in a pathway that will lead to a valued life. But the kind of typical day programs that you and I have discussed, in my opinion, are not likely to lead to that pathway of a valued and quality of life. Work promotes dignity and respect. Remember I said everybody could be employed if, let's take a look at the ifs. If they desire to work. That's a big one, which means we have an obligation to try to create options for people that are challenging enough, interesting enough, valued enough for them that they would want to work. Work, whether it's volunteer work or whether it's paid work. People can be employed and work if guardians are supported. If somebody has a guardian, the guardian does not agree, in most states, we're not allowed to have that person work if the guardian is not agreeable to it. Everybody can work if the regulations allow it. There are some places where the regulations are very restrictive and the dollars received by day program providers cannot be used to hire job coaches to have people work. And in some cases, this may surprise you, there are a number of states where people have to receive all their services actually in a building in a particular location. They have to be in a licensed location, so there's no real way that they can work other than that in a location because the regulations prevent them from leaving that building and going out into the greater community and working. People can be employed if sufficient resources are available. It's a tragedy when these obstacles cannot be overcome. It is a tragedy when these obstacles cannot be overcome. Sometimes we hear people say, and I don't know if you have or not, I have a right, and it's my right not to work. I don't have to work if I don't want to, and I can come to this day program, and if all I want to do is listen to music, and that's what I choose to do, and it's my right. I've heard people say, it's my right, all I want to do is watch TV. It's my right just to stay here and sleep. I have my rights. It's my right to come here and drink coffee. It's my right to sit here because I like playing games. That's why I come to my day program. I want to play games or whatever. Do you agree? By the way, is it the person's right not to have a life? And when people make these decisions about not wanting to work, and I'm going to speak to this more, is it really informed consent? Do they understand how their decision will impact the quality of their life when all they want to do is sit there and watch TV or play games? Do they really understand the consequences to that decision and how it is going to affect the quality of their life? The first responsibility, in my opinion, of adult day services is to provide opportunities for work. That's first and foremost the first responsibility of day services, is to provide opportunities for work. Unfortunately, and what I'm about to share with you is very provocative, I think many agencies throughout this country are taking a step back. I hear folks say, I was employed, I even paid taxes, I was productive, I was really proud of my job. The radical inclusionist, and that's what I call them, closed my sheltered workshop. So now I work for free as a volunteer. I don't earn any money. I sit around playing games in a day program and go to the mall and engage in community inclusion. Now, my position is it would be wonderful if we could give all men and women an opportunity to be employed in inclusionary settings with appropriate supports. That's a vision I know that many of us have. But merely closing a sheltered employment program when we don't have opportunities for people to work that are more inclusionary because we're against sheltered employment and then just putting them in a day program where they do nothing of meaning and value, I think we need to reassess whether that is in their best interest. Far and away, the best prize that life offers is the chance to work hard at work worth doing, by Theodore Roosevelt. Isn't that a wonderful statement? Far and away, the best prize that life offers is the chance to work hard at work worth doing. How would you feel if you never had an opportunity in your life to do work that was worth doing? Would it alter the quality of your life? Here are the 5 elements of the transitioned day service. Here are the 5 elements. Number 1, the expectation is that all individuals in the day service must be productive. That's number 1. Number 2, ideally, people should be able to receive money, be remunerated. Now, I don't know how to always make that happen, but I still believe we need to do everything we can to give people an opportunity to earn money. Number 3, it should be inclusionary. People should have an opportunity through their work to form new and valued relationships with other people that go beyond the staff that are paid to relate to them, that go beyond their family, that go beyond the people who they receive services and supports with. Inclusion means relationships. Number 4, the work that people do should give them some sense of joy, some sense of fulfillment. That cannot always happen, but ideally, that should be one of the preferred elements. And number 5, we would like people to grow, develop, and become more independent as a result of their work. Learning, learning, learning as a result of work. Now, let's take a look at these in a little bit more detail. First of all, in terms of being productive, it would be wonderful if all of us here today always had an opportunity to have a job that we really loved. You know, I would hate to think about it, but something could happen to me as a result of a stroke, a heart attack, that I may not be able to stand up here and deliver this presentation. My intellectual ability, my ability to process may be so limited. But if I had to, you would find me at a fast food restaurant flipping hamburgers in order to sustain myself. I will do, and you will do, what we need to do in order to assume our responsibility as adults. The jobs that we engage in cannot always be preferred. Bite the bullet. As I said, ideally, our employment should give us a sense of satisfaction. If not, responsible adults should be expected to take whatever employment is available. I commonly will go to a day program and someone will say is, well, Tom, I want you to meet Bob. Hey, Bob, do you work? Oh, you're looking for a job, huh? How long have you and the staff been looking for a job? 3 years, huh? Oh, you haven't found what you really like yet, huh? 3 years. We all have different ways of looking at that, don't we? Money. Money, and we said in terms of remuneration, because that's an important part of it. Money is a pathway to emancipation for most people. Wealthy people know how to make it, save it, and keep it. Support people with disabilities on their path toward emancipation. And part of what we do needs to be able to help people to make money, save money, and learn how to spend it. It's all part of that process. Repeated interactions, both in employment and volunteering. And again, I'm going back to the 5 elements that we talked about: inclusion, relationships. When people volunteer and people are employed, repeated interactions with the same people over and over and over again are most likely to lead to those valued relationships. So if somebody is engaged in a volunteer activity, I ask myself is, Can I give that person an opportunity to keep going to that same church, meeting the same receptionist twice a week, returning the missiles and bulletins that they have folded or collated and handed to that receptionist so that they begin to form some relationship and they know each other? Every relationship you and I have in our life, no exception, other than with our family, we have obtained as a result of our participation in life. That is true. Every relationship. It is the relationships that you have maintained with the children or the kids you went to high school with, relationships with people from your last job, the relationships with people who you attend church with, relationships with people who you play euchre with on Thursday night. It's the relationships with people on your bowling league. It's the relationships you've maintained with people while you were in prison serving time for your white-collar crime. This is where relationships come from. Some people don't think that's so funny, do they? Anyways, repeated interactions is where relationships come from. And in terms of learning, the next element, I speak for myself. And this graph depicts my learning. The vast majority, though I have, a doctorate, the vast majority of everything that I learn is a result of my work. And it's true for most of us. I mean, the things that I'm sharing with you today, I didn't learn these things in college. I learned them through my work. So we go back to an earlier statement that I made, is learning is not necessarily the goal of the day program. It is the result. It is a result of giving people an opportunity to be actively involved and engaged in productive activities. For many folks who we support, they struggle with what I would call lethargy. I won't take the time to go through some kind of demonstration of it, but you've all seen it. You've seen it in the movements of many folks who we support. It's that slow kind of movement. Somebody's involved in washing the car, and they're supposed to, as part of their activities, and they go to pick up the spray bottle, and they reach down and they pick it up, and they look at it, and then they spray a couple times, and then they set it back down, and then they get the rag, and they go, by the way, they may be fooling you, they're not going to fool me. Put a banana split in front of that person and watch what they do. Watch them. They'll inhale the banana split. It's gone. Well, if he can eat that banana split like this, he can go ahead and clean the windows. We're not talking about people with cerebral palsy who have difficulty in perhaps extension or issues of range of motion. We're talking about a lowered level of expectation with regard to people putting it out, if you will. Support people with disabilities in giving it their all. Got it? Giving it their all. Working harder. Increasing endurance. Exceeding their own expectations. Pushing themselves. And by the way, I seldom see this happen. There's a question I commonly ask, and the question is, when was the last time you saw someone who required pervasive supports? The old terminology would be perhaps severe or profound intellectual disabilities. Pervasive supports. When was the last time you saw someone who required that level of supports sweating as a result of engaging in a productive activity? And when I ask that question, usually from folks, they say, well, I didn't ever see anyone sweat. I saw him, he was on a treadmill and sweating. Well, that's not productive. Remember what the definition of work is. Work is, if the person you had doing it wasn't doing it, you'd have to hire somebody to do it. But you and I sweat. You sweat when, you rake your leaves. You sweat when you mow your yard. You sweat when you wash the car. You sweat when you vacuum. But there tends not to be an expectation that the men and women who we support sweat. We should expect them to put their backs into it. By the way, you want to know what my thought is on this? Children don't sweat. Children don't sweat. And to whatever extent there is a sense that these men and women are children in adult bodies, we tend to minimize our expectations and don't push them. There may be a variety of reasons, but I think that is clearly one. I spent many years working with staff in day programs, teaching them how to do simulated activities, and I now look back and think, what was I thinking? Simulated, is contrived or pretend work, and I now consider that disrespectful. We were very proud of that because it was a great improvement over what we were doing before. By definition, simulated work is meaningless, by definition. Undoing one's work in their presence is devaluing. So someone says, okay, we're not going to undo their work in front of them. We're going to do it behind their back. Undoing one's work behind their back is dishonest. Our best bet is to give people meaningful and valued work all day long. Do you want to do simulated work? One of the things that guides me in everything I do is a concept called GEM. G-E-M. G-E-M. It stands for good enough for me. And I always ask myself, when I go into a residence, I go into a day service, I see myself and I ask myself, is this good enough for me? Is that how I would want to spend my day? Though meaningful, volunteering is not a replacement for employment. I absolutely support volunteering, because people are making a valued contribution to their community. It is not a replacement for employment. Many of you in this room may volunteer. It doesn't replace your employment. You may volunteer at a synagogue, a church, you do it on the weekend, you volunteer for some organization, you do it in the evening. It doesn't replace your employment. Earning money is a significant aspect of being an adult. I support volunteering when we are unable to obtain employment for people. Then volunteering is the fallback position, if you will. There's a thing that I refer to as faux inclusion. It's like made-up inclusion. The radical inclusionists extol the benefits of mall herding, van therapy, drive-through integration, or park loitering as a substitute for work. And there are people who do that. We're going to take them to the park, and we're going to do our community, they call it community exploration, like explorers someplace. We're going to go explore the community. My response is beware. Eliminating site-based services to achieve inclusion is a myth frequently founded on smoke and mirrors. And I want to expand on that. Merely because we believe a site-based program is wrong, and they call these places programs without walls, without really understanding the implications of that. Let's take a look at that for a minute. Faux inclusion. Support people in environments that meet their needs. Now, who's going to argue that? Assure physical safety. I'm out in some of these programs without walls, and here's this staff with 4 people. One guy's constantly running out into the street. The other one's running down the sidewalk, trying to keep these people safe. But somebody out there is happy because we don't have a physical plant. We're in the community. Doing what? We need programs that promote psychological well-being. I'm with a group of folks and they're in a park, and here is this man engaged in body rocking, engaged in self-injurious behavior, slapping his face, and people are in the park just staring at him like he's some monstrosity. Where's the psychological well-being in that? I ask myself, that's me. It may make somebody happy that they're not at a site, but where's his psychological well-being? Maximize growth. Focus on work. That's what we need to be doing. Vocational training programs, and some folks will talk about doing vocational training. And for people with intellectual disability, vocational training programs are like cockroach hotels. People check in, but they never check out. Many of these folks go into these vocational training programs, or, they call them pre-vocational programs. Ever heard of pre-vocational programs? There is a man who many consider the father of supported employment, Dr. Lou Brown, and he is known to have coined the phrase, or when people ask, well, what does pre mean in pre-vocational? He says, pre means never. Pre means never. Job training. Don't train, then place. Train in place. Teach the skills in the environment where you want them exercised. One of the hallmarks, one of the characteristics of intellectual disabilities, we've known this for years, is a difficulty in generalizing learned behaviors from one environment to another. We've known that. So teach the skills in the environment where you want them exercised. You want someone to learn pedestrian skills so that they can get to their job more effectively? Don't hold up pedestrian cards in a day program room. Teach them those pedestrian skills in going from point A to point B. You want somebody to improve their money management skills so that they know how much money to pay the bus driver or put in the coin box when they get on the bus. Let's not use monopoly money in the day program room. Let's actually teach those skills in the environment where we want them exercised. Across the board, in all skills that we teach. Transition. Day services and work. I will end with this one, and this, in essence, reflects the transition. It's the difference between visiting the park and adopting the park. It's a great hallmark. You see, there's nothing wrong in people just going to the park and visiting the park. Many people do that. That's what you do when you're not working. You want to go visit the park in the evening, go visit the park. Now, at the same time, we could still go to a park as part of a day program, but we could adopt the park. We can be responsible for having help take care of it so the people who come to the park see the men and women who we support as making a valued contribution to their community and to the park. The transition is the difference between playing computer games. You know, I go into some of these typical day, everyone's sitting behind a computer. What are you learning? I'm learning computer skills. I don't have an issue with people interacting with a computer. The issue that I have is, what are they doing with it? Why don't they take that computer and write letters to the military in Iraq? Some of these soldiers have no one in their life, and there's literally lists that you can write letters to these folks. What a wonderful volunteer activity. Why don't they go ahead and get an inexpensive software program where they can produce greeting cards and put them in little packets of 6 and give them to elderly people in a nursing home who don't have the money to buy greeting cards so they can give them to their family and friends? It's a difference of the model. Are we going to have an academic model, or are we going to have people working? By the way, can you improve your computer skills by producing greeting cards and writing letters? You all know the answer. In my opinion, you're going to learn your computer skills a lot more effectively and a lot more efficiently because you're motivated to do what you're doing. You enjoy it. You realize you're making a difference in people's lives. It's the difference between pegs in a board and salvaging buttons. I don't argue that putting pegs in a board or dropping checkers in a vertical slot, that helps people improve their pencil grasp by hand coordination, attention to task. It helps improve, perhaps, sequencing, left to right progression, color matching. My question is, why don't we give people an opportunity to learn those skills in the context of something that is productive? Let's go to a place like Salvation Army or Goodwill Industry and get all the clothing that is not salvageable. Bring it in and let's start taking those buttons off and salvage the buttons. They're purchased by the pound at craft stores. They buy them. They're very valuable. Why don't we go ahead and generate money that we can donate to the Cancer Society by salvaging those buttons? By the way, can people learn colors by salvaging buttons? Can they learn the difference between what is small, what is big, and so on and so forth? Of course. Can they improve their eye-hand coordination? It's the difference between just engaging in van rides and Meals on Wheels. It's the difference between crafts for the sake of crafts. Commonly at Thanksgiving or Christmas and Halloween, the classic day program, you go in there and people are cutting out little Santa Clauses at Christmas and taking the little cotton balls and putting on Santa's face. It looks like a preschool program. Why aren't they making crafts that they can give to elderly people in the nursing home who have no family to decorate their room on the various holidays? Why aren't they making centerpieces to go on a table at a senior citizens program? Why aren't they making centerpieces for a preschool program that the kids could put on their table? Why aren't they being productive? You see the point? It's not so much what we have people do, it's why we have them do it. It's the difference between sorting color chips and making paint swatches, which is a rather interesting thing. Making paint swatches is, if you've ever been to one of these paint stores and you've seen all the paint colors and all these things, those are all glued on there by hand by folks. It's a great productive activity. Boy, you really can learn colors that way, can't you? It's the difference between sensory programs and growing and selling herbs. It's the difference between an exercise program. I commonly go to day programs. They said, we have an exercise program. I believe an exercise program is wonderful. Go sweep the sidewalk. Go rake the leaves. Let's take that exercise and make it productive. It's the difference between cutting out paper and cutting quilting fabric that we're going to go ahead and donate to a sewing circle with a local church where they make quilts and blankets for impoverished people in their community. It's the difference between just coloring and selling paintings on eBay. Work. If the person doing it stopped, you'd have to hire somebody to do it. And with that, I am confident that we all can make this transition and give the men and women who we support an opportunity to valued and productive lives. Thank you very much. Let's make it happen. To you too. Thank you.